We shall be sending a letter from this meeting to the Soviet ambassador calling for the release of Vladimir Bukovsky, who's reported to be dying in Vladimir prison, where he's been incarcerated for making known to the world the facts concerning the abuse of psychiatry for political purposes in USSR.
A man is dying in Vladimir prison. He must be released.
Who is it? Bukovsky. You'll get plenty of opportunities. Just 2 minutes over, yes, okay. Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Press conference later. Okay.
I am delighted to be, for the first time in England, in the country which during last years had been the welcome sanctuary for so many Russian refugees. I'm happy to meet British people, the keepers of democratic traditions, the traditions of freedom. I should like to express my extreme gratitude to every single person in sympathy with our cause in the Soviet Union. I'm sure that the battle for democracy, which is waged now in the hearts of people in the eastern countries in Soviet Union, is a battle of everybody's concern. This battle is a part of universal struggle for human rights, for freedom, for justice. And it is in England that I hope to have the strongest support, strongest response to this cause.
Volodya, did you know about the formation of the committee for your release in England?
I know it just now, not before it. When in prison, I didn't know it. I heard from my mother, I gathered that David contributed so many efforts in my behalf. But whether it is through a committee or his personal efforts, I never knew before my release.
Who actually made your release? Was it the governments? Was it people working on your behalf?
Oh, not because, of course, not governments. I'm sure of it. I don't know the real picture of it, the real negotiations, the real initiators of this exchange. I never knew it, and can only guess about it. But I suppose that all the measures, all the steps which had been taken afterwards by governments, maybe by any official spheres, would never occur if my friends, known or unknown, common people would not press upon their governments, upon Soviet governments, upon everybody. If it will be the expression of the will of common people, expression of the will of everybody, every single person, and all of them, it would never occur.
I haven't spoken with Bukovsky's mother for a long time, since her telephone was disconnected by the KGB. But she succeeded in getting a letter through. Here it is. Dear Vita and Marina, all our hopes rest with you now. Volodya can die any minute. I kiss you both. Nina Ivanovna Bukovskaya.
My mother tried to tell me during these brief meetings with her, and very rare ones, something she tried to tell most she could. The more the better, but because these meetings are not in isolation, because anybody of guards are present every time, you know, and can interrupt the meeting in any moment. Because of it, she tried to tell me it briefly and not very understandable for the guards, you know. And it was more convenient for us to operate by names just as names of our friends and relatives. And I had to gather to guess what the real meaning of it is, what the real meaning of this information is about. That had been the way. And because of it, she can explain me that David do so many to you, so many in your support. And about my friends in Germany, she could tell me only that, not Gerstenmaier, but Ira make so many for you now. She are so helpful to us. And never any details. In France and other names and persons, by name, by first name, never by surname, because guards could guess what is it and stop the conversation. Because of it, I had just a tips of the real events, just a tip of information.
The letters I normally get from highly placed people in our government is, these things may be, but of course we have no standing to intervene. I don't know what that means, actually.
I suppose governments, on the contrary, they try to subside it, just to calm it down, to cool it down, all these campaigns. I suppose your governments are not very glad to have such campaigners inside of your country too, because they regard themselves as obliged to establish good relations with Soviet authorities, to have a trade, to have a neighborhood relations, you know. No matter how bad these authorities in Soviet Union are. For them, I suppose they are hypocritical, maybe not so much as our government, but I suppose in some degree too, because they never think about such things as being with the murderers around the same table, you know, just to invite and to receive them as a decent persons, Soviet representatives. When they are murderers, they are oppressors, you know. And because of it, they regard their duties as peacemakers, you know. But on the contrary, it is not peacemaking. It is an awful mistake or maybe crime. They aggravate the situation in Soviet Union and in other places, I suppose, too. They cannot separate the cases of oppression in one place and another. I suppose I regard it as one single front of a struggle. Common people, honest people against these sly politicians, sly big figures, and big men, big forces, you know. That's my idea. Maybe I am wrong, I don't know.
Bukovsky! Bukovsky! Bukovsky!
All this hatred, all these differences between people are created not by people themselves, but by their governments and politicians, really so. I should like to speak with everybody, with trade unionists, with workers, with students, just to explain them that our common fight with evil forces, and it is up to us to decide it. I suppose it is a crucial point, because it is a crossroads of so many problems in a modern world. A problem of peace, a problem of freedom, a problem of racial or national hatred. Now, in so many corners of the world, you have a hatred sparkling and burning and making wars and making disasters. And really, when these diplomats try to make sure that they're trying to decide these problems, for me it is rather funny. It is a monkey business, because they discuss such details as tactical ones, as amounts of nuclear weapon, as amounts of troops, amounts and differences, technical differences of equipment of arms. But it is not reason. It is not real cause. It is just consequence. It is a second thing. The first thing is the understanding of people and tolerance and mutual help, mutual struggle of everybody.
Did you know about David's vigils on your birthday?
I knew only one thing about my birthday, that there are many friends in the world who are trying to celebrate this date. So this much of information I could get, but not more than that.
The first year that I went and stood outside the Soviet embassy, it had a distinct feeling of conscience salving. I didn't feel I'd done very much, and this was the only way I felt I could make just a gesture, that's all. Being pretty sure that his mother would hear that someone had stood outside the Soviet embassy all day on behalf of her son, I knew would bring some comfort to her, although God knows it was a little enough thing to do. This was a purely personal kind of association of myself who had happened to meet Bukovsky, showing solidarity for him. And I knew, I felt strongly there, and this is the first, maybe, of many times, if necessary, for 12 years, I knew I would be there. It's just a very feeble gesture, but it is nonetheless the only way that personally I can show I haven't forgotten.
We should immediately demand the release of all political prisoners and, first of all, to put an end to the misuse of psychiatry for political purposes, to put an end to this practice.
This barbarous action is demonstrating once again the perversion of Soviet psychiatry for political purposes, which is causing widespread revulsion throughout the world. We're going to get that off right away, because our work is just beginning.
Now, on behalf of the Parliamentary Human Rights Committee, I wrote to the Soviet ambassador on June the 7th, asking for his comments on allegations of psychiatric abuse in his country, which we had received from a well-known British psychiatrist, and which, I may add, are corroborated by many other sources. And the reply I've received from the First Secretary at the Embassy dismisses the allegations as propaganda clamor and smear campaign against Soviet psychiatry. This, friends, simply will not do.
My name is Dr. Max Gammon. I've got a letter here for the Soviet ambassador. Thank you.
They refuse to accept any petition brought by hand because they fear some kind of provocation. You see, one KGB man is always watching another KGB man, and if KGB man A seemed to express any understanding or sympathy, he would be in serious danger himself.
Good afternoon. I've got a letter for His Excellency Monsieur Lunkov, the Soviet ambassador. It's from myself and the Campaign Against Abuses of Psychiatry for Political Purposes. Can you accept that, please? Why can't you accept it?
Why do
we've written to them.
Why do you so brave in the Soviet Union and so cowards here?
Arrangements have been made for you to accept this.
Well, you have much work in future. I assure you.
We promise.
But donkey.
Well.
You can bring tears to my eyes at a moment as well. You really are. You must burst into tears.
This has happened so many times that it is a waste of time, frankly, going there. But one always hopes.
Especially the 13th.
We have a lot of problems in Soviet Union. We have a awful situation in working class. so many exploitation, without any rights, without any hope. I hope, I think that with the help of common people, of the same level of people in other countries, and only in this way we can decide the problem. Maybe it is not up to me to make any advices, any warnings, I don't know, I suppose. Because here people are much more informed about events in the world. But I should like to warn everybody, every common people in the world, not to believe in this sly propaganda, Soviet propaganda, not believe in this very attractive from the surface ideas which Soviet system tried to sell to everybody, because they have such a big appeal to honest hearts. But in essence, it is a real slavery. It is a real danger to everybody. I hope and I believe that every person are clever enough and honest enough to understand it. We have yet a time to save all of us.
Anybody who criticizes the denial of civil rights in the Soviet Union can be defined as being mentally sick. A person who is accused of anti-Soviet propaganda, agitation, or even religious instruction and observance can be referred to a psychiatric commission by the KGB. And having then been found unfit to plead in a court because of creeping schizophrenia or paranoid development of the personality, the prisoner then loses the right to be tried in an ordinary court of law where he might say embarrassing things that would be reported to the world at large. Now, reputable British psychiatrists say that the institutions where the dissidents are held are staffed by convicted criminals and the conditions under which the prisoners are held are horrendous. Powerful psychotropic drugs are used, administered to the patients, so-called. They're given electric shock therapy and large doses of insulin, which cause loss of consciousness.
Victor, how long were you in prison in Russia?
5 years.
What were you arrested for?
For the demonstration on the Red Square against the occupation of Czechoslovakia.
What kind of trial did you have?
I had no trial at all. So officially there was a trial, but it was in absentia, because I was recognized to be of unsound mind. My friends who took part in this demonstration were on trial. They got different terms of imprisonment and exile.
But you were found to be of unsound mind?
Yes.
Yeah. And what sort of prison were you sent to?
To a mental prison hospital for compulsory treatment.
They found you to be insane?
Yes.
I am a full-time National Health Service psychiatrist, and I'm Russian-speaking. I do not regard this meeting as being an anti-Soviet meeting, because let there be no mistake about it. If such practices as have been amply described by previous speakers occurred in any other country, I would be here doing my best to draw your attention to these practices. Nevertheless, it must unfortunately be stated that in no other country do we have evidence of persistent, systematic misuse of psychiatry for the purpose of political repression.
I thought my profession is not political at all. And when I first, of course, when I listen the radio, BBC and Voice of America, and when I read some of that, of course I knew about abuse of psychiatry in Russia, but I didn't really believe it because I didn't want to believe. And so I thought maybe it's a little bit of propaganda, and maybe if it happened in Russia, I never can meet it because not in my hospital, maybe it's in mental prison hospital, and I'm working in an ordinary hospital. And it was very far away from me. But when I first really met these people, I became really not unhappy. I became really a little bit crazy because I wanted to help these people, really. And doctor, and especially psychiatrist, it's quite a good profession, and it's really terrible to know you now working like in prison. You're a doctor, you are not officer from prison.
Victor, how were drugs used in these mental prisons?
The drugs, usually the drug treatment comprised the treatment by the pills of aminazine, with the pills of aminazine, haloperidol, driftazine, and other tranquilizers. In case that the inmates refused to take these drugs, they were usually injected by the same drugs. The prisoner loses the capacity to read, to write, loses any interest in life. He can't find any cozy, comfortable position in sitting, walking, laying. He is losing the appetite that is probably profitable in conditions of the food that he is given. But he can't sleep properly. So it's a constant torture. And his thoughts are confused. And he feels that he is losing himself, losing his personality. Another drug is haloperidol, when the limbs are swollen and are felt like wooden ones, so that he's walking like a wooden doll. The third drug, sulfazine, it is normally used in Soviet mental hospitals, mostly for the punishment of the patients. It causes the high temperature, 40 degrees centigrade. It is very painful. A person who gets it feels weakness and fever that lasts for some days after the even one injection. Also, sometimes for political prisoners, electroshock is used, especially in Dnipropetrovsk mental prison hospital.
I tried to make a publicity outside of hospital. And very quickly, KGB knew about what happened, and they began to follow me. And they telephoned in my hospital to chief of my hospital, and they transferred me from my department, where very interesting for me patients, to another department where it was a geriatric department, very old women, and I was not dangerous at all.
Vladimir Bukovsky is in prison and dying now because of probably one of the most shameful acts of betrayal by a body of professional men known to history. This occurred at the Mexico Conference of the World Psychiatric Association in 1972. Vladimir Bukovsky had sent out urgent appeals from USSR to ask the world psychiatrists to examine and investigate the abuses of psychiatry in USSR. And owing to the action of the Executive Committee of the World Psychiatric Association, which included members of the British medical profession as well as other places, his voice was silenced. Bukovsky's message was not allowed to be heard at that conference, and immediately repression started out with greater violence in USSR, and Bukovsky was thrown into prison.
That one meeting in Mexico. Yeah, I heard about it, and first of all I heard it, who told it me? Glusman, of course. The first man who told it me was Glusman in a camp. He had been in rage because of this, and he told me it is a betrayal, it's a complete betrayal. When it occurred, I had been in prison and had no any ideas about events outside, but he had been in better conditions and could get information about it. He had been free, I suppose, before it. And he explained me all this event and how it had proceeded and why it hadn't been. And our idea had been that it's a politics, a big politic, which stopped it, which didn't let it be discussed and condemned, I mean, this abuse openly. And it had been another example that the bigger man is, the more difficult for him to be honest, to be open, you know. And such big person as this psychiatric big shots, I don't know, is it understandable? For them, it is a matter of political play, you know, not as a honest scientists, but as a dealers. It was awful, not only for me, for my friends, for victims of psychiatric abuse. It had awful impact on psychiatry in Soviet Union in general, because it would be wrong notion to think that all psychiatry in Soviet Union are wrong and all psychiatrists are criminals. It is a wrong one. We had in Soviet Union among psychiatrists a good persons, a good, honest scientists, but so a handful of them, they try to make healthy this branch of science, to pure it out of any ideological, political, and others influences. Of course, it is a difficult task, and if outside of Soviet Union nobody will help them, they would be defeated, and we will be pushed back for decades. The single way is to help us, to help all psychiatrists, honest psychiatrists in Soviet Union, to make it a real science. And I hope that I will have a chance to speak with them, with psychiatrists here, and explain them the situation and try to change their minds, their opinions about it.
There's still a great reluctance to admit what gross perversion of the truth, let alone psychiatry, took place in Mexico City. There are still certain doctors in this country who are honorary members of Association of Psychiatrists in Moscow. Now this is quite intolerable. There are still the doctors, the Soviet doctors on the Serbsky Institute, still go and meet their British and American colleagues at these big world conferences of psychiatrists. They're going to meet them again quite soon. I don't know what will be said. I know what I think doctors should do about these people. My only personal opinion is that some doctors should be before an international court. And I know the doctors, and I could mention their names. I won't mention their names because they've got no right of reply. I know their names, and if I have anything to do with it, these people will stand before a court I don't want to see them punished. I think it'd be quite enough if the facts are thoroughly known. The true extent of perversion of truth, corruption of their own ethic, their own teaching. This is what I would like the world to know about, because the world doesn't know about it. Psychiatrists, like any profession, close their ranks.
For me, this is not a political meeting, because the things we're talking about go beyond differences of ideology. It's not even a meeting which is really about medical practice. We're not arguing about how one should or should not treat a schizophrenic, how one should or should not diagnose. It's quite, I mean, for a certain light relief, it's nice to know what sort of diagnoses are coming out of Soviet Russia. But we're not here to talk about medicine. I'm not here talking because I have a difference of opinion about medical practice or indeed about ideologies. We're here because there's a fundamental difference between good and evil, and it's as simple as that. There is a way you can't behave to another human being.
We talk a lot about democracy, which is only a word after all. Those people are in their lives actually trying to live and find out what it means to fight for democracy. And I don't mean with atom bombs or H-bombs. They know they are completely engaged in a fight for something, for an independence, for the right to be themselves, if you like, whatever you like to call it. And that fight must concern us.
So the freedom and rights are never given to you. You have to take them. And the most important thing in democracy, as I gather it, is the right to be fighter. If you have such a right to be fighter, to be soldier of everybody's freedom and everybody's rights, then it is a real democracy.
We, the ordinary people, the laymen of this country, we should never underestimate our power. I think we can at least remind our politicians that they are also, and before everything, men and women, men with responsibilities higher than boat catching, to remind our doctors that they are also men and women with responsibilities higher than careers and the pursuit of power, to remind our lawyers, no, perhaps that's too much, I would say, remind our lawyers merely to respect the spirit and letter of their own legal systems, here as in Russia. And most important, to remind ourselves that we too are human beings, with a duty to other human beings, regardless of nationality, or creed, or party, or politics, or profession.
Volodya, when you first met David, what were your impressions of him?
It had been, I suppose, it was in Moscow in 1970, yes, David?
Yes, somewhere in June, I think.
Yes. My impression of him, I don't remember exactly. I remember he told me he's an actor. And I felt myself a little surprised, because I never met an actors who are interested in Soviet life, in our condition before that, you know. And he had several appointments, as I remember, with actors in Soviet Union too, with some ideas to discuss with them about theatrical fears and stage and so on, stage questions, some, well...
Kazakov?
Kazakov, yeah, really. Well, and I met him first time I met him, it had been in a flat of our common friend, Volpin, mathematician, well known and poet too. I think my first idea had been to try not to spoil his impression of our problems, because he's a freshman. He it is a really difficult thing to understand our situation, even for professionals, even for us in Soviet Union and Soviet citizens who lived all their life in this country. It's a rather complicated matter to understand this system working. And for him, it had been more complicated. A second thought, it is a prisoner's one, because the prisoners, everybody who served a long term enough and several times had a clash with security and police, has the idea when meeting with anybody, would he will witness against me if a trial will stop us, if we will be in an ordeal of some sort. It is every time thought when living in such country as Soviet Union, with everybody with whom you have some contact, some deal, you have to appreciate him from the first glance. Can you be quite sincere, quite frank with him, or you should better be more reserved, more cautious? How he will behave himself if he will be arrested. And after some little conversation between us, I gathered that I understood that David didn't afraid this situation. And it was a good help to me just to subside my anxiety. And after some time more, I gathered that it is not new situation for him, because he had some kind of problems in his native land too. And it is not new for him to be in a clash with authorities, with oppression, with misunderstanding of people, and so on. And after that, I became more quiet, because it's a very difficult thing. Every time when you meet any foreigner, to see him and to understand if he can withstand the pressure. The foreigner are usually more fragile. And with David, my impression had been that he's a real man, a real representative of Western people, not that I met before.
Have you been doing this, I think, since 1972 or something like that? Yes. Morning.
How are you? Could have done with this coverage a few years back, I may say.
Yes, and this is on behalf of all political prisoners.
I don't know when this will be over.
In general, of course, it was always struggle, always a lot of preparation, a lot of thought before one approached the media. Most, I think, of the heavy papers tended to avoid any mention of dissidents as being a boring subject generally, and therefore wouldn't sell any more copies. And this has been a constant struggle. To try and make that remark fair, as in the case of doctors, so also with journalists, there have been cases of exceptional individuals who have known some implications of the Bukovsky case and have personally tried to get material printed and had a struggle, a great struggle with their news editors to get anything in at all. So, when one makes sweeping statements, you always have to think of the exceptions to those statements. But by and large, an extremely unrewarding struggle, an extremely difficult struggle, even to get mention of some of these people's names. And I'm going back, right back into the early 1970s. But now, of course, we have, when it isn't wanted, we have an enormous splurge of publicity. It's going to be the story of my life again.
Yeah,
It must bore you as much as it bores me.
Not at all. I need to get it right, otherwise I'll get it wrong.
No, the thing was that I was interested in human rights anyway through the NCCL set up, and having, I suppose, been a pacifist during the war, you kind of concentrate your mind.
Yeah.
There is no great story in that.
But then why specifically did you home in, as it were, on Bukovsky? And...
Well, that was this curious coincidence of holding a placard with his name on it.
Thank you very much indeed. Can we come into the house, do you think? If we don't get in the way.
Yes, if we do, yes.
Thanks very much.
Just leave us in the kitchen.
Right, thanks a lot.
This is Malcolm coming. I think she'll. I think Peter. Yeah. Yeah. I think what I'll do is talk to Joanne while she's doing it. Okay. Right. This is lunch for Mr. Bukovsky, is it?
That's right, yes, it is.
What are you giving him? Let's just come and get this over with,
Yes.
and then
At least
one more thing will be the way out of the way.
Right. Richard. So, now you're talking to us.
Not quite. We just walk over here so the camera can stand about here, and then a second we'll stop.
Yeah.
And we just have a sort of a general chat.
If you're trying to get one person out of prison anywhere in the world, not only Soviet Russia, but anywhere in the world, and you feel you have a personal commitment, you have to give your life to it.
And how were you brought in on the scene, as it were?
Well, really trying, the best way I could help was to try to keep the farm going, because David had to go away a lot to Copenhagen, to
She's done most of the work, of course.
France, you know, for different meetings and things.
But you have the same feeling towards Mr. Bukovsky?
Oh, yes, I do. I've got the feeling for all prisoners, because David was in prison when he was young, and
Yeah, not quite
I saw
under
the
same
inside
conditions.
of a prison. Yes, but once I'd seen it, I never wanted anyone to be in prison again.
So where do your lives go from now, from here, now that he is free?
Well, the next thing we're trying at the moment is Marina, our friend, the doctor, who's over from Russia. We're trying to get her little boy out, who's 10, you see.
What kind of interview would you want, then?
Not particularly.
Oh, I see. You want to get a shot or two of him here on the place, yes.
What was it that made you decide to give up almost everything to devote your time to the cause of Vladimir Bukovsky? What's he going to do when he's here?
Here, just west.
And how did you come into it, Mrs. Markham?
What time would you say earlier?
Rose, well, if he's just leaving London, he got lost in London. So, it can't be under an hour. Well, it must be an hour and a quarter anyway. But, I mean, if you count an hour, you're absolutely safe.
Where is David? Oh, David!
Come in, and this is Marina. Okay, we'll go in, shall we? Come in. Sorry.
Just stand and talk me, like that. Like that.
Righto. That could be it, yes?
Well, yes, but
you want to get him in the warm, you know? Okay.
Well,
okay. Okay.
yes,
Go ahead.
it's
Thank
so
you.
good. And you're going to have all quiet and peace.
Yes.
That's right. You sit there.
Thank you.
Fine. Lovely.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, now then, what about, you're not going to be able to get you at the lunch hour?
I'm afraid they will destroy you all this farmhouse.
Don't worry, they already have.
Well, let's sit down.
Okay. Now we're going to pretend to have a meal, okay?
Lovely.
We have got no food.
Mr. Bukovsky, how do you feel to be here today?
Delighted.
Did you ever think that you'd ever arrive here at Mr. Markham's home?
Oh, I hope so, of course. Never lost our hopes, yeah?
Oh, that's true. That's true. Put it there.
Because Miss Parker.
Sure.
Ask him first. Would you like to go around the other side?
Is this the sort of place where you hope to relax for a few days?
Yes, I hope so. But so short period. To my sorry, I cannot stay here.
What are your plans then after you've stayed here for a few days?
Well, I have my work to do.
Fine. You let me know if it's... They'll go when you like, because you're the one who needs the rest, right? Gentlemen?
Mr. Bukovsky, could I ask you about the recent arrests in Moscow by the KGB? It seems that members of the Helsinki
Well,
group...
I don't think we can get to it, actually. The drink's behind it.
What do you make of this? What do you think is happening now?
I am sure that after several, maybe weeks or months, there will be trial.
Can you tell me, Mr. Bukovsky, have you been aware of any KGB activities since you've been out of Russia?
No, I don't know. I lost my habits to look around,
Yes, that's good. What have you heard from Russia since you've been in the West?
What I have?
What have you heard? Have you heard from your friends, from other
my friends?
Here's the Borisov.
Kovalyov, other men, so many persons are suffering now, and new arrests, new trials, and ahead of us only fight with David, with everybody. No rest,
Who are you going to toast now?
Borisov and Misha.
Yes, Misha
Marina's little
Bukovsky,
son.
who is still held, the boy of Marina's son. We'd like him to come out fairly soon. And Borisov, I think, is a good chance for him if you're now. Yes.
And Guzman.
Yes,
And Guzman.
Dr. Guzman, also wrong for years.
And Chornevel and Morat.
We don't forget anybody, right?
I have been our habit in Moscow before my arrest to have a toast first our sentiments, our toast with the lost friends, the friends who are absent now around our table.
Yes.
За тех, кто не с нами.
Да. Toast number 2.
За свободу.
Toast number 2.
Lovely. Could you look up to the cameras and do it? Would you do it again, please?
No, sorry, no, we can't do that.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yeah. Thank you very much.
How long are you staying here for?
He can't answer that question and I can't answer it. Well, what he wants is rest. What he's not getting now. Okay?
Thanks a lot. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much.
Okay,
Come on, please.
Children, I am Russian, I am on not English. Goodbye.
220.
Bye.
Thank you.
Come out with that then.
I tell you, no one's moved at all.
Well, I think there's another door here.
Yes, there's another door there.
Everybody who believes in it, everybody who really thinks the communism is a paradise, let him go to Soviet Union, but not as a tourist, not as a passerby, not as a stranger, but let him go and stay in the Soviet Union as just a common citizen, to work, to find the flat, to find the job, to be susceptible to all these laws of Soviet, all this oppression. And I'm sure that the strongest, the fanatical believer will be anti-communist afterward, will be a hate. And I'm afraid, another thing, I'm afraid he will become a fascist after it. It is a more awful, a more dangerous thing for me now.
Why would he become a fascist?
Because so many oppressions, so many outrageous things in Soviet Union, and all of them under the surface of these nice words, nice propaganda, nice promises of best life in the next generation and next one, every time moving ahead of us, just as this thing before the dog, which they dangle and try to seduce him to go ahead, That's the real way.
How will you stop him becoming a fascist now?
I think we have to help them to find this honest way, open way. Because if the single way out of our predicament, our disaster in communist countries would be the forcible way, would be the violent way. If the world will leave us only one way of violence in Soviet Union, then I'm sure that all these forces, all these thoughts which are growing up now in people will be in vain, and we will have another totalitarian system, but in another color.
You don't think that one should use violence to overthrow the system in Soviet Union?
I'm sure that a violent way in Soviet Union and in other countries of this system will lead only to fascism, to some sort of totalitarianism. And a single way out of it is a democratical one, and it is possible only with the help of all simple people in the world. That's the way.